What if I told you there was a soldier who fought in World War II and earned medals from 3 different armies, not as a spy, not as a traitor, but as a decorated war hero in each one? This is the story of a man who wore the uniforms of Finland, Nazi Germany, and the United States. A man whose life defied everything we think we know about loyalty, survival, and war. By the time his story ends, you'll question everything you thought you understood about the Second World War. Because this isn't fiction. This is history, and it's absolutely true. His name changed 3 times. His allegiance shifted with the tides of war, but his identity as a warrior, that never wavered. Welcome to the most unbelievable true story of World War II you've never heard. The story begins in 1919, in a small Finnish village, where a boy was born into a world that would never know peace. Finland, a nation that had just won its independence from Russia, a land of endless forests, frozen lakes, and people forged by one of the harshest climates on Earth. The infant had no idea that within 20 years he would be fighting for his country's survival, and that would only be the beginning. His childhood was simple: a farmhouse, a stern father who taught him discipline, a mother who worried he was too wild, too restless. But even as a boy, something set him apart. While other children played, he studied maps, he trained his body, he prepared for a war that hadn't started yet. By age 8, he was already obsessed with military history. By 12, he could navigate the forest blindfolded. By 16, he could outshoot men twice his age. His teachers called him intense, his peers called him obsessed, but he called it preparation, because in Finland every man knew the Russians would come back. In school, while others daydreamed, he studied tactics, winter warfare, guerrilla strategy, survival in sub-zero temperatures. When he turned 18 in 1937, there was never a question of what he would do. The Finnish military was waiting, and he was ready. Basic training was supposed to break recruits, but for him, it was confirmation. He was born for this. The rifle felt natural in his hands, the orders made sense. The discipline, he'd lived it his whole life. His instructors noticed immediately. This wasn't just another conscript. This was someone special, someone dangerous. While others struggled with winter survival training, he thrived. 40 degrees below zero. That was just another Tuesday in Finland. Skiing 20 miles with full gear. He did it faster than anyone else. The Finnish military in 1939 was small, poorly equipped, but utterly determined. Every man knew what was coming. The Soviet Union, with its millions of soldiers, would eventually demand more territory. And they were right. On November 30th, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland with overwhelming force. 500,000 Soviet soldiers, thousands of tanks, total air superiority. Finland had 180,000 soldiers, barely any tanks, almost no anti-aircraft guns. On paper, it should have been a massacre. It should have been over in weeks. But the Soviets hadn't counted on the Finnish winter, and they definitely hadn't counted on soldiers like him. The Winter War had begun, and our soldier, now 20 years old, was about to become a legend. The first Soviet tanks rolled across the border like a steel tsunami. The sound was deafening. The ground shook. Finnish civilians fled in terror. But the Finnish soldiers didn't run. They dug in. They waited. And when the moment was right, they struck. Our soldier was assigned to a ski reconnaissance unit. Fast, mobile, deadly. They moved through the forest like ghosts, appearing where the Soviets least expected. The temperature dropped to -40 degrees Celsius. Soviet soldiers, unprepared for the cold, froze to death in their trenches. Their vehicles broke down. Their supply lines collapsed. But for the Finns, this was home. This was their advantage. The winter wasn't their enemy. It was their greatest weapon. The tactic was simple but brutal. Small Finnish units would hit Soviet columns from the forest, create chaos, and disappear before the Soviets could respond. They called it Mahdi tactics: surround the enemy, cut off their supplies, let the winter do the rest. It was psychological warfare at its finest. Our soldier led raid after raid, silent approaches on skis, sudden ambushes, Molotov cocktails against tanks, then vanish into the white forest like they were never there. The Soviets called the Finnish soldiers the White Death, ghosts in the snow, killers you never saw coming, terror made flesh. Soviet tanks designed for open warfare were helpless in the dense Finnish forests. They couldn't maneuver, they couldn't see, they became metal coffins. And the Finns had a weapon the Soviets never expected: glass bottles filled with gasoline. Simple, crude, devastating, the Molotov cocktail was born. Our soldier became an expert: approach the tank from behind, wait for the right moment, light, throw. The fuel would seep into the engine, then fire. The crew had seconds to escape. More often than not, they didn't make it. Entire Soviet divisions were destroyed by units a fraction of their size. The world watched in amazement. How was tiny Finland holding off the Soviet giant? The answer was simple: superior tactics, unbreakable will, and soldiers who fought for every inch of their homeland like it was the last place on earth. Our soldier was promoted, decorated, recognized as one of the finest winter warfare specialists in the Finnish army. He was 20 years old and already a veteran of dozens of engagements. But the Soviet Union had one advantage Finland couldn't overcome: numbers. For every Soviet soldier killed, 10 more took his place. By March 1940, after 105 days of brutal fighting, Finland was exhausted. Ammunition was running low. Reinforcements weren't coming. The mathematics of war were unavoidable. On March 13, 1940, Finland signed a peace treaty with the Soviet Union. The terms were harsh. Finland lost 10% of its territory. 500,000 Finnish civilians became refugees overnight. Our soldiers stood in the snow, listening to the news. They had won nearly every battle, but they had lost the war. The bitterness was overwhelming. Finland survived, but at a terrible cost: families torn apart, land surrendered, and worst of all, the knowledge that the Soviets would be back. Our soldier returned to civilian life, but there was no peace for him. The war had changed him. He couldn't settle, couldn't adjust. The quiet felt wrong. He tried, he really did. He worked odd jobs. He attended veteran gatherings, but his mind was always on the next war, because he knew it was coming. And then, in June 1941, Operation Barbarossa began. Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union with 3 million soldiers. The entire Eastern Front exploded into the largest military conflict in human history. Finland saw its opportunity. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Finland aligned with Germany, not out of ideology but out of survival. This was their chance to take back what was stolen. The continuation war began. Finnish forces, including our soldier, crossed back into the territories they had lost. This time, they were on the offensive. Our soldier was different now. Harder, more experienced, more dangerous. He wasn't the young recruit anymore. He was a leader, a tactician, a killer. Village by village, kilometer by kilometer, Finland reclaimed its lost territory. Soviet forces, already overwhelmed by the German invasion, couldn't hold. For a brief moment, Finland had its revenge. The lands stolen in 1940 were back in Finnish hands. Our soldier walked through villages he thought he'd never see again. But he knew this victory was temporary. The Germans were allies of convenience, not conviction, and when the tide turned, Finland would be alone again. By 1942, the Eastern Front had stabilized. Finland held its reclaimed territory but pushed no further. They weren't interested in conquering Russia. They just wanted their land back. Our soldier was now a decorated officer. His reputation had spread. The Germans had noticed, and they had an offer. German military intelligence approached him quietly. The Waffen-SS was recruiting foreign volunteers for specialized units. Winter warfare experts were desperately needed. The proposition was simple. Join the Waffen-SS, fight on the Eastern Front, receive advanced training, better equipment, and the chance to fight the Soviets more effectively than ever before. For our soldier, this was a moral crossroads. The SS had a dark reputation even then, but he wasn't motivated by Nazi ideology. He was motivated by one thing: destroying the Soviet Union. In his mind, the calculation was clear. If the Germans defeated the Soviets, Finland would be safe forever. Personal beliefs didn't matter. National survival did. In 1943, he made the decision. He volunteered for the Waffen-SS. It was the choice that would define and haunt his legacy forever. He traveled to Germany for training. The SS training camps were brutal, designed to break men and rebuild them as fanatics. But he was already broken and rebuilt by the Finnish Winter. When he put on the German uniform with its distinctive insignia and iron cross, he felt nothing. No pride, no shame, just focus. This was a tool, a means to an end. His commanders quickly realized they had someone exceptional, a soldier who could teach them about winter warfare, a veteran of actual combat against the Soviets. He was assigned to SS reconnaissance and ski units on the Eastern Front, units that operated behind Soviet lines, gathering intelligence, conducting raids, spreading terror. The Eastern Front in 1943-44 was hell on earth, a meat grinder of unprecedented scale. Millions dead, cities razed, entire armies annihilated. Our soldier participated in raids that would never make it into official histories, operations deep behind Soviet lines, ambushes, sabotage, the kind of warfare that leaves no witnesses. He was good at it, too good. His kill count climbed, his decorations increased. The Germans valued him highly, but inside a part of him was dying. This wasn't the clean defensive war he'd fought in Finland. This was total war, scorched earth, atrocities on all sides. The rules of civilized warfare didn't apply here. But he kept fighting, because the alternative was Soviet domination of Europe, and that, to him, was unacceptable. So he pushed his doubts down and did what he was trained to do. By 1944, the tide had turned. The Soviet Union was no longer the disorganized force of 1939. They had adapted, learned, and now they were coming west with unstoppable momentum. The German army began its long, bloody retreat. Everything they had conquered was being lost. The Eastern Front was collapsing, and everyone knew what came next. Our soldier fought in desperate rearguard actions, trying to slow the Soviet advance, buying time for civilians to flee. The retreat was chaos. Discipline broke down. Survival became everything. He saw the writing on the wall. The Germans were losing, the Soviets were winning, and when the war ended there would be a reckoning. War crimes trials, executions, justice and revenge blurred together. In September 1944, Finland signed an armistice with the Soviet Union. The continuation war was over. Finland switched sides, now fighting against their former German allies. For our soldier, this was the ultimate betrayal. Finland had abandoned him. The Germans were losing. The Soviets wanted him dead. He was a man without a country. As the war ended in May 1945, he went into hiding. His name was on Soviet execution lists. His service in the SS made him a war criminal in some eyes. His options were limited. He used false papers, moved constantly, stayed in displaced persons camps across Europe. Thousands of men were doing the same thing, trying to disappear, trying to survive the peace. For 3 years he lived in the shadows, working menial jobs under false names, always looking over his shoulder. The hunter had become the hunted. But then, in 1948, something unexpected happened. American intelligence services were recruiting. The Cold War was beginning, and they needed men with specific skills. Men who knew the Soviets, men who could fight, men who were already ghosts. Our soldier fit the profile perfectly. An American officer approached him in a refugee camp. The conversation was brief. The offer was clear: a new life in America, a new identity, and a chance to keep fighting the Soviets. He didn't hesitate. America represented escape, redemption, a third chance. He signed the papers, took a new name, and prepared for the journey west. In 1949, he boarded a ship bound for New York. In his pocket, documents with an American name. In his mind, the hope that maybe, just maybe, his war was finally over. He stood on the deck of the ship, watching the Statue of Liberty grow larger on the horizon. Europe was behind him. His past was buried, or so he thought. America in 1949 was a land of opportunity for those willing to work hard and keep their heads down. For a man with his particular skills, there was one clear path: the military. He moved into a small apartment in a city he'd never heard of before. Everything was new. The language, the culture, the food, but he adapted. He always adapted. He spent his nights studying English with intense focus. The accent would never fully disappear, but the words came quickly. He had learned Russian and German. English was just another mission. At age 30, when most men were settling into civilian careers, he walked into a U.S. Army recruitment office. The recruiter looked at the immigrant with broken English and saw just another displaced person looking for steady work. They had no idea what they were getting. Basic training at Fort Benning was meant to transform civilians into soldiers. For him, it was a formality. He could do every exercise in his sleep. The obstacle courses were easier than Finnish winter training. His instructors noticed immediately. This wasn't a typical recruit. The way he handled weapons, his tactical instincts, his physical endurance, something was different. They pulled his file, looked closer at his background. The details were vague: European veteran, refugee, recommended by intelligence services. That last part caught their attention. By 1951, he had caught the eye of Army Special Forces. The newly formed Green Berets were looking for exactly this type of soldier: experienced, unconventional, willing to do what others wouldn't. He volunteered immediately. Finally, he'd found his place again, not as a regular soldier but as something more: an elite warrior, a specialist in the impossible. The Special Forces selection process was designed to have an 80% failure rate. Men broke down physically and mentally. Many quit. But for someone who had survived the Winter War and the Eastern Front, this was nothing. He excelled in every phase. Airborne training. He was jumping out of planes before most of his instructors were born. Winter warfare. He literally wrote the manual that American forces were now using. In 1952, he earned his Green Beret, the proud symbol of America's elite Special Operations Forces. His third military career had officially begun. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't fighting for survival or revenge. He was fighting for something he'd never had before: a home that actually wanted him. The 1950s were the height of the Cold War. The Soviet Union was expanding its influence. Communist insurgencies were popping up around the world. America needed specialists who understood unconventional warfare. Our soldier, now an American citizen with an American name, became an instructor. He taught winter warfare to soldiers who had never seen real combat. He showed them how to move silently through snow, how to survive in extreme cold, how to ambush superior forces and disappear. The tactics he'd learned in Finland were now American doctrine. His students whispered about him. There were rumors: a European accent that sometimes slipped through, scars that told stories he never shared, a hardness in his eyes that came from somewhere dark. Some said he'd fought for Finland. Others whispered he'd been in the SS, but no one asked directly. In the 1950s military, you didn't question a man's past if he was good at his job, and he was the best. By the mid-1950s, he was a captain, respected, trusted, decorated. He had successfully reinvented himself for the third time. The transformation was complete. He married, started a family, bought a small house. For the first time in his life, he experienced something resembling peace. Maybe the war was finally behind him. But the world had other plans. Southeast Asia was heating up. French colonial forces had been defeated in Vietnam. The country was divided. Communist forces in the north, American-backed government in the south. And the dominoes were starting to fall. By the early 1960s, American military advisors were being sent to South Vietnam in increasing numbers. The mission was training, teaching the South Vietnamese to fight the communist insurgency. Special forces were perfect for this role. Small teams, working with indigenous forces, unconventional warfare. It was exactly what the Green Berets were designed for. In 1962, he received orders, deployment to Southeast Asia, military advisor to South Vietnamese forces. It was supposed to be a training mission, low risk, professional development. He kissed his wife goodbye, told her he'd be back in a year, promised his children he'd write, and then he was gone. Vietnam was unlike anything he'd experienced before. The heat was oppressive. The jungle was alien. This wasn't the clean, frozen forests of Finland. This was humid, rotting, chaotic. But war was war, and he adapted again. The South Vietnamese soldiers he was training were brave but poorly led. Corruption was rampant. Equipment was substandard. Morale was low. It reminded him of the early days in Finland, fighting impossible odds. He threw himself into the work, teaching tactics, leading patrols, building trust with the local forces. This was what he was good at, making soldiers out of men who didn't think they could fight. The Viet Cong were a different enemy than the Soviets. They didn't mass their forces. They struck at night, used the jungle, blended with the civilian population. It was guerrilla warfare at its most sophisticated. But he'd seen this before, on the Eastern Front, in the Finnish forests. The tactics were different, but the principle was the same: make the enemy afraid, control the terrain, win the minds of the locals. By 1964, the American presence in Vietnam was escalating. What had been a training mission was becoming a full-scale war. More troops, more advisors, more engagement with the enemy. He was promoted to major, given more responsibility, more missions. The Pentagon trusted him. He delivered results where others failed. But something was changing. He was in his mid-40s now, not old by normal standards but ancient for special operations. Most men his age were behind desks. He was still jumping out of helicopters. His body was breaking down. Decades of combat had taken their toll. Old wounds ached. The cold Finnish winters had damaged his joints. The tropical heat made everything worse. But he never complained, never asked for reassignment. This was who he was, a warrior. Without war, he had no purpose, and he'd rather die in combat than fade away behind a desk. In 1965, the mission tempo increased. The Viet Cong were getting bolder. North Vietnamese regulars were infiltrating the South. The war everyone said wouldn't happen was happening. He led reconnaissance missions into contested areas, gathering intelligence on enemy movements, identifying targets for airstrikes, the dangerous work that happened before the main forces arrived. His team respected him but worried about him. He pushed too hard, took too many risks, volunteered for missions that should have gone to younger men. They didn't understand. He wasn't being reckless. He was being true to himself. This was his life. This was all he knew. Without it, he was nothing. In November 1965, he was assigned to a reconnaissance mission in the Central Highlands. Enemy activity in the area had increased. Command needed eyes on the ground, current intelligence, fresh data. It was supposed to be routine. Fly in by helicopter, observe, report back. No direct engagement, in and out. He'd done missions like this hundreds of times. 3 different armies, 3 different wars, but always the same. Get in, get the information, get out. On November 18, 1965, he boarded a CH-34 helicopter with his team. The morning was clear. The flight path was standard. The pilot was experienced. Everything was routine. The helicopter lifted off from the base, rotors beating against the humid air. The jungle stretched out below, green and endless, beautiful and deadly. The mission was to observe a suspected enemy position in the mountains near the Laotian border. Remote terrain, dense jungle, difficult access, perfect for enemy staging areas. The helicopter climbed, heading west toward the mountains. Radio chatter was normal, weather was acceptable. Nothing suggested this would be anything other than another routine flight. But the mountains in that region are treacherous. Weather can change in minutes, clouds roll in without warning, visibility drops to 0, pilots call it flying blind. About 30 minutes into the flight, weather conditions began to deteriorate. Clouds, rain, the pilot radioed back to base. Conditions were worsening, request to abort mission. Base command made the call, continue to target area if possible, weather window might open, if not return to base, use your judgment. The pilot pressed on, he was experienced, he knew these mountains, he'd flown this route before, it would be fine. But the weather didn't clear, it got worse, clouds descended, rain turned to storm. The helicopter was flying through soup, instruments only, no visual reference. And then communication went silent. The last radio transmission was routine. Position report, weather update, no distress, no emergency, just a professional pilot doing his job. And then nothing. Back at base, radio operators tried to raise the helicopter. No response. They tried again, and again, only static. Standard procedure kicked in. Wait for scheduled check-in time. The pilot might be maintaining radio silence for tactical reasons. Give it time. But the scheduled check-in came and went. Still no contact. Now it was officially a problem. Search and rescue operations launched immediately. Other helicopters took off, heading toward the last known position. But the weather that had claimed the first helicopter now hampered the search. They searched for days, flying grid patterns over dense jungle, looking for wreckage, listening for radio signals, finding nothing. The jungle canopy was too thick. If the helicopter had gone down, it could be completely hidden under the trees, invisible from above. Ground teams tried to reach the area, but the terrain was nearly impassable. Mountains, jungle, enemy territory. It would take weeks to search on foot, and there was no guarantee they'd find anything. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, the operation was scaled back. The helicopter and everyone on board were officially listed as missing in action, MIA. For his wife back in the United States, the notification came like a lightning bolt. Not dead, not alive, missing, the worst possible answer. The military did what it always does, filed the paperwork, sent the flag, offered condolences, but without a body there was no closure, just questions. His children grew up with a ghost, a father who had disappeared into the jungle, maybe alive, probably dead, never knowing. His fellow Green Berets held a memorial service, but it felt incomplete. He wasn't there. No body to bury, no grave to visit, just an empty space where a legend used to stand. The crash site was never found. Decades later, despite advances in technology and multiple search efforts, the wreckage remains hidden somewhere in the Vietnamese jungle. Some believe the helicopter went down in Laos, across the border, in territory that was inaccessible during the war. Others think it crashed in a river or was completely consumed by the jungle. The truth is, no one knows, and after nearly 60 years, the chances of ever finding out are nearly zero. His name was added to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. Panel 3E, line 126. One name among 58,000. One story among millions. But his story was different, because his journey had taken him through 3 armies, 3 wars, 3 countries. And somehow, against all odds, it ended the same way it began, in a forest, fighting, disappearing into legend. For years, his story remained classified. The CIA and military intelligence had good reasons to keep quiet about recruiting former SS soldiers, even exceptional ones. But secrets don't stay buried forever, especially not secrets this compelling. In the 1990s, as Cold War documents were declassified, researchers began piecing together his incredible journey. The Finnish war hero, the German SS officer, the American Green Beret. It seemed impossible. How could one man fight for 3 different armies? How could he be honored by all 3? The contradictions were staggering. But the documentation was undeniable. Service records from Finland showed his Winter War heroism. German SS records confirmed his Eastern Front service. American military files proved his Green Beret career. 3 armies, 3 wars, 3 identities, 1 warrior. His real name was Lauri Turney, born in Finland 1919, died in Vietnam 1965, or at least that's when he disappeared. In Finland, he's remembered as a national hero, a fighter who defended his country against impossible odds during the Winter War. Streets and military buildings bear his name. In Germany, his service is complicated. He fought for the Waffen-SS, an organization with a dark legacy. But his motivation wasn't ideology. It was the destruction of the Soviet Union. In America, he became Larry Thorne, a Green Beret, a U.S. citizen, a soldier who served his adopted country with the same intensity he'd served his birth nation. The question everyone asks is, how do we judge a man like this? Was he a hero, a war criminal, a mercenary, a survivor? The answer depends on which uniform you're looking at. To understand Lauri Turney, you have to understand the context of his time. He came of age in an era when nations were destroyed and borders were drawn with blood. Finland was caught between 2 monsters, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Neutrality wasn't an option. Survival meant making impossible choices. He chose to fight, and when one fight ended, he chose to fight again, and again, because fighting was all he knew, all he was good at, all that gave his life meaning. Some historians argue he was a man of principle, anti-communist to his core, willing to ally with anyone, even the Nazis, to destroy the Soviet threat. Others see a man addicted to war, unable to adjust to peace, constantly seeking the next battle because civilian life felt hollow. The truth is probably both. Humans are complex, especially humans forged in the fires of total war. What's undeniable is his skill. In every army he served, he was among the elite, not because of ideology or politics, but because of pure tactical genius and unbreakable will. The Finnish military studied his Winter War tactics for decades. His strategies are still taught in military academies around the world. The Germans recognized his value immediately. He wasn't there to learn from them. He was there to teach them about winter warfare and Soviet tactics. The Americans benefited from his decades of combat experience. His unconventional warfare expertise helped shape early Special Forces doctrine. In 2003, nearly 40 years after he disappeared, the U.S. military promoted him posthumously. Larry Thorne, the immigrant soldier, was officially made a major. His grave at Arlington National Cemetery is symbolic. His body was never recovered, but his legacy earned him a place among America's honored dead. In Finland, memorials stand in his honor. Museums display his medals and uniforms. His story is taught to every Finnish soldier as an example of courage and skill. Even in modern Russia, military historians grudgingly respect his tactical abilities. He was an enemy, but he was a worthy enemy. But the question remains, why did he keep fighting? After the Winter War, he could have stopped. After the SS, he could have disappeared into civilian life. After coming to America, he could have taken a desk job. But he didn't. At 46 years old, he was still volunteering for combat missions in the Vietnamese jungle, still putting himself in harm's way, still seeking the fight. Some psychologists suggest combat addiction, the adrenaline, the clarity, the sense of purpose that only war provides. Civilian life, by comparison, feels gray and meaningless. Others point to survivor's guilt. He lived when so many comrades died. The only way to honor their sacrifice was to keep fighting, to never stop until he joined them. Or maybe it's simpler. Maybe he was just a soldier, and soldiers don't retire. They serve until they can't serve anymore. His story raises uncomfortable questions about loyalty and morality in wartime. Can you serve multiple nations without being a traitor? If your cause is consistent fighting communism, does it matter which uniform you wear? Is it possible to separate a soldier's skills from the cause they serve? Can you condemn the SS while respecting an individual SS soldier's tactical brilliance? These aren't easy questions, and there aren't easy answers. What we do know is that Larry Thorne never saw himself as a villain. He saw himself as a defender, first of Finland, then of Western civilization, then of American freedom. Whether you agree with his choices or not, you can't deny his commitment. 3 times he put on a uniform. 3 times he went to war. 3 times he proved himself among the elite. His fellow Green Berets remember him with respect bordering on awe. He was older than most of them, harder, more experienced, and still outperforming men half his age. They didn't care about his past. They cared that when things got dangerous, you wanted him on your team, because he'd been through worse and survived. The Vietnamese jungle that claimed him still holds his remains somewhere. Periodic searches have been conducted, satellite imagery analyzed, ground teams sent in. But the jungle keeps its secrets. The wreckage has never been found. His body was never recovered. In a strange way, it's almost fitting. A warrior who lived in the shadows, between nations, between identities, disappears without a trace. No body, no closure, just stories, and what stories they are. Today, military historians study his career as a unique case study. How one man navigated the complex political and military landscape of the 20th century. His tactics are still relevant: unconventional warfare, small unit operations, winter combat. These are timeless military concepts. The Green Berets still honor his memory. His name appears in Special Forces history, a reminder that warriors come from unexpected places. In Finland, he's a complicated hero, revered for the Winter War. His SS service is acknowledged but contextualized. His American career is seen as the redemption arc. His family, the wife and children he left behind, eventually found some peace. They never got answers about exactly what happened that day in 1965, but they got closure. His son followed him into the military, serving in a different era, a different war, but carrying the same name, the same legacy. The question we're left with is this: what does his story tell us about war, loyalty, and the human capacity for survival? It tells us that war creates impossible situations, that people do what they must to survive, that ideology is often less important than survival. It tells us that soldiers are complicated. They're not heroes or villains. They're humans making choices in situations most of us will never face. It tells us that some men are born for war, and peacetime for them is just the pause between battles. Laurie Turney, Larry Thorne, 3 names, 3 armies, 1 warrior. He fought in the frozen forests of Finland against overwhelming Soviet forces. He survived. He fought on the apocalyptic Eastern Front in the uniform of the Waffen-SS. He survived. He fought in the jungles of Vietnam as an American Green Beret. And there, finally, his war ended. Some people live multiple lives. He lived multiple military careers, each one distinguished, each one remarkable. The medals tell the story. Finnish decorations for bravery, German Iron Cross for combat effectiveness, American service ribbons for dedication and sacrifice. 3 nations honored him, 3 militaries respected him, 3 wars shaped him. And in the end, the jungle took him, not in a dramatic last stand, not in a heroic sacrifice, just a helicopter that disappeared into the clouds and never came back. There's poetry in that. A man who was always hard to pin down, hard to define, hard to categorize, vanishes without a trace. His legacy lives on in military doctrine, in special forces training, in the stories old soldiers tell young recruits about what a real warrior looks like. Today, if you visit Arlington National Cemetery, you can find his memorial, not a grave because there's no body, but a marker, a remembrance, a place to honor what he represents. If you visit Finland, you'll find monuments to the Winter War heroes, his name among them, the boy who became a legend in the snow. And if you visit Vietnam, you can stand in the Central Highlands, look at the jungle-covered mountains, and know that somewhere under that green canopy, his story ended. But stories like his don't really end. They become legend. They become teaching tools. They become reminders of what humans are capable of when pushed to extremes. 3 armies, 3 wars, 3 identities. 1 man who refused to quit fighting, even when the world told him to stop. 1 soldier who proved that loyalty isn't about flags or politics. It's about standing with those who fight beside you. 1 warrior who showed that the human capacity for survival, adaptation, and determination knows no limits. This was Laurie Turney. This was Larry Thorne. Finnish hero, German soldier, American Green Beret. A man who fought on 3 sides of the same war against totalitarianism. A man who disappeared into legend exactly the same way he lived, on his own terms, in the middle of a fight, never surrendering. His name is on memorials in 3 countries. His tactics are taught in military schools worldwide. His story is told wherever soldiers gather. Because some stories are too important to forget. Some warriors are too extraordinary to fade into history. And Laurie Turney, Larry Thorne, the soldier who fought for 3 countries, is one of those warriors. The helicopter is still out there somewhere, lost in the jungle, waiting to be found. Just like the truth of his story waited decades to be told. But now you know, now his legend lives on. 3 uniforms, 3 wars, 3 nations, 1 incredible warrior. Never forgot, never surrendered, never defeated. This is his story, and it's absolutely true.